Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking on a genuinely fascinating challenge. We're going to demystify one of the most powerful, yet honestly frequently misunderstood research methodologies in the social sciences and healthcare. I'm talking about grounded theory. If you've ever read a qualitative research paper and thought, wait, how did they magically arrive at those brilliant conclusions? Well, you're in the exact right place. Our goal today is to separate true methodological rigor from, well, sloppy science. We're going to see exactly how real theories are built from the ground up. Think of this explainer as a map for our very own detective journey.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, the qualitative research problem. Then, discovering grounded theory, followed by the great methodological divide. After that, we'll look at the core mechanics of GT, and finally, ensuring methodological rigor.
All right, starting off with Section 1, the qualitative research problem.
So, to really grasp why grounded theory is just so important, we first have to understand the incredibly high stakes of qualitative research. Imagine a researcher as a detective, trying to solve a super complex case. They're looking at human behaviors, motivations, complex systems. But what happens when that detective doesn't have a reliable blueprint for finding the truth? Like, what actually happens when research lacks rigor? When we're dealing with human narratives instead of, say, hard numbers and statistics, ambiguity can easily creep in, and without strict rules, the entire investigation basically falls apart.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how perfectly that exact danger is captured by researchers Tobin and Begley. They said, without rigor, there is the potential of fictional journalism masquerading as research. Wow, that is a hard-hitting quote, right? But it highlights a massive risk in the academic world. Because if researchers claim to use a complex method but don't actually follow its strict rules, they aren't producing science. They're just writing stories and, dressing them up in fancy academic language.
And that leads us straight to a very common misuse in the field. Reviewers and experts are constantly warning about this sort of academic sleight of hand. It goes like this. A researcher might borrow a really basic coding technique, completely skip the hard analytical steps, and then magically present a list of themes as if they represent a fully emerged theory. It's like we're just invited to take it on trust that the theory just emerged from the data, without them offering any step-by-step explanation of how those insights were actually built. So how do we fix this rigor problem? How do we keep our academic detective honest?
That brings us to Section 2, discovering grounded theory. So grounded theory, or GT for short, is an inductive methodology. Instead of starting with a pre-existing theory and then testing it against the real world, you do the exact opposite. You generate the theory directly from systematically gathered and analyzed data. Think of it kind of like building a house from the ground up, but without a pre-drawn architectural blueprint. The foundation, which is the data you collect, actually dictates the shape and structure of the final house. The theory is literally, grounded in the data.
To really appreciate this, we need a quick look at the timeline. Grounded theory was introduced back in 1967 by Barney Glaser and Anselm Strauss, and at the time, this was revolutionary. It completely flipped the traditional hypothetico-deductive method, where you guess a hypothesis and then test it against data. It flipped that completely on its head. By the 1970s, it became extensively used in nursing research, mostly because it was just so effective at bridging the gap between abstract theory and real-world clinical practice. Fast forward to today, and GT has evolved into several distinct qualitative variants used across the social sciences. But actually, that evolution into different variants created a whole new challenge.
Which leads us to Section 3, the great methodological divide.
This historical schism brilliantly illustrates the two standard approaches that emerged over time, Glaiserian, which is also known as classic grounded theory, and Straussian grounded theory. See, after their initial collaboration, Glaser and Strauss kind of diverged. Glaser maintained this strict focus on pure emergence, basically letting the theory organically reveal itself from the data. Strauss, on the other hand, developed much more structured, prescriptive frameworks for coding. Now, we are strictly neutral on which is better here. They are both highly respected, standard qualitative research approaches. The problem really isn't which one you choose. The problem is what happens when you don't choose.
Researchers absolutely must firmly choose one path and stick to its specific tenets. You have to avoid what experts call methodological incoherence. If you try to mix and match classic pure emergence with Straussian structured frameworks, you completely undermine the rigor of your study. Picking and choosing methods across the two schools usually prevents the analysis from ever reaching that crucial abstract theorizing level. You just get stuck describing information rather than actually explaining it. Okay, so if a researcher successfully picks their path, how do they actually do the work?
Let's find out in Section 4,
Core mechanics of GT. Let's break down the engine of this methodology and see how it builds across 4 main steps. What makes this so fascinating is that it's a continuous, iterative loop. Step 1 is data collection, but unlike other methods, you immediately start Step 2, constant comparison. This involves intense line-by-line coding to take a fresh look at data fragments. So, data collection and analysis are happening simultaneously. As you code, you move right into Step 3, memoing, which is basically writing down your theoretical ideas as they hit you. And all of this loops continuously until it finally results in Step 4, theory generation.
Now, the absolute heart of this iterative loop is a concept called theoretical sampling. This is the active process where your data collection is controlled and directed by the theory that's starting to emerge. And this is exactly what makes grounded theory so uniquely powerful. You don't sample randomly, and you definitely don't sample based on some preset demographic list. You sample strictly based on where the clues, the data itself, lead you. If your emerging theory points to a specific behavior, you specifically seek out more data to test and refine that exact behavior. It's brilliant. But it all sounds great in theory, right? How do we evaluate the success of this detective work?
Let's wrap up with Section 5, ensuring methodological rigor.
25. I really want you to remember this number. 25 is the exact amount of specific criteria items we must check to ensure a classic grounded theory study is methodologically sound and actually ready to be trusted.
Those 25 items make up what's known as the GURGT checklist. That stands for the Guideline for Reporting and Evaluating Grounded Theory. It spans 12 main areas, covering everything from the study aim to the sampling procedures, all the way to how theoretical saturation was reached. Pointing back to our earlier problem, using guiding principles like the GURGT tool drastically enhances a researcher's theoretical sensitivity. It essentially provides a concrete benchmark to prove their research followed the rules and isn't just, fictional journalism. So the crucial point here is understanding how this rigorous 25-step methodology actually translates into the real world. Let's look at a prime example, the Flanati et al. Nursing study. Researchers wanted to know exactly how emergency room registered nurses were recording respiratory rate observations. By using classic grounded theory, they systematically gathered data from 79 nurses, and the emerging theory revealed a pretty shocking reality. Because health sectors mandated forced compliance, nurses were often recording respiratory rates without actually counting the respirations. The nurses had cultivated this belief that the constant vital checks were redundant. Because the methodology was so incredibly rigorous, it uncovered a dangerous hidden shortcut, generating a theory they called rationalizing transgression. This right here is the true power of grounded theory, uncovering the hidden realities that directly impact things as critical as patient safety.
And that brings us to the end of our detective journey. The next time you're reading a qualitative study, or hey, perhaps preparing to embark on your very own research, I want you to look really closely at that methodology section. Ask yourself, is the theory truly grounded in the data, built block by block through rigorous comparison and theoretical sampling? Or is it just floating above it, a product of sleight of hand? Keep your detective hat on, demand rigor, and always keep asking questions. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I'll see you next time.